And we are back for prepping for winter with the Mercy sample chapter. Arya has awoken from a wolf dream where she was on the hunt, but now she is in Braavos, a city masked in fog. Arya has taken on the identity of Mercy, an actress and a stagehand who helps various actors get ready for the play The Bloody Hand, a story based on the life of Tyrion. Arya then assists the actor Bobono in getting ready, in a direct parallel to Penny assisting Tyrion over in Slaver's Bay. And now let's continue. "Mercy," he sang as she tied him tight. "Mercy, mercy. Come to my room tonight and make a man of me. I'll make a eunuch of you if you keep unlacing yourself just so I'll fiddle with your crotch." "We were meant to be together, Mercy," Bobono insisted. "Look, we're just the same height." "Only when I'm on my knees." So here Bobono pretends to receive sexual pleasure from an 11-year-old girl, and then, perhaps jokingly, perhaps not, propositions that 11-year-old girl. Bobono asks Arya to make a man of him, that is, take his virginity in this case. Now, this is yet another parallel to Tyrion over in Slaver's Bay, who is reminiscing about his time with Shae before the Battle of the Green Fork. In our story, to be made a man actually has a double meaning. On the one hand, it can mean to lose one's virginity, but on the other hand, it can mean to be first exposed to battle. Tyrion over in Slaver's Bay even thinks, "You never forget your first," about his time at the Green Fork, reinforcing this double meaning of battle and sex. And so here Bobono, who is playing Tyrion, is being prepped by Arya, who is playing Shae, and Bobono asks to be made a man, which is something that happened to Tyrion in battle shortly after this whole preparation. Now, Bobono then comments that he and Arya are the same height, and Arya says that this is only true when she's on her knees. So in our story, we don't really know how tall Tyrion or Bobono are. We know that Tyrion thinks 5 feet is towering, and he's said to be half the height of Jaime, though that would make him only a little over 3 feet. But he's also said to be the same height as an 8-year-old Tommen, which would probably make him a little over 4 feet based on the average 8-year-old's height. The average dwarf in our world, by the way, is 4 feet tall, though Mushroom the dwarf was only 3 feet tall. So, all in all, who knows? We also don't really know the height of Arya, though the average 11-year-old girl is about 4'9". Of course, there are all sorts of other factors involved, including when puberty hits. It hasn't for Arya, and there's obviously nutrition. This is a medieval setting after all, and Arya had been living hand-to-mouth for nearly a year in the Riverlands. All in all, while Bobono's claim that they are the same height is quite unlikely, Arya's retort is probably also an exaggeration. "Do you remember your first line?" It had only been a fortnight since the dwarf had lurched onto stage in his cups and opened The Anguish of the Archon with the Grumpkin speech from the merchant's lusty lady. Isambara would skin him alive if he made such a blunder again, and never mind how hard it was to find a good dwarf. And so here we hear about some previous shows at the gate, and we get a sense of how long Arya has been working at the theater. She seems to have been here at least 2 weeks during the run of The Anguish of the Archon, and perhaps long enough to see the previous show, The Merchant's Lusty Lady. Now, I will say Arya's timeline is somewhat difficult to put together as she has little interaction with other characters. We know that she leaves for Braavos sometime after the Purple Wedding as she hears news of it from Polliver at the end of the crossroads where the Hound is wounded. In fact, based on travel times and the fact that she stayed in one village for 2 weeks, her departure may be a good month after the Purple Wedding. And the trip to Braavos should also take a month as well. Then, based on moon cycles, we know that Arya spends a couple months in training and a couple more months as Cat of the Canals before being blinded. We then know she's Blind Beth when it starts snowing in the Riverlands at the end of Jaime's story in A Feast for Crows. She experiences this as Nymeria, and she's still Blind Beth when she hears about slavers being forced to land in Braavos after a storm, which Jon also hears about in Jon 10 near the end of A Dance with Dragons. Jon 10, by the way, is likely a full moon, and likely the same full moon that Kevin Lannister sees in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons, which places the Mercy chapter a month after this. Anyway, after being Blind Beth, Arya is assigned to be the ugly little girl, though she's only in that role a few days. So all in all, it does seem that Arya has been Mercy for about a month. But who knows, we may be off by a month, so maybe 2 months, but probably not longer. Now, interestingly, Bobono seems to confuse the roles he plays, which on first read seems rather irresponsible, but on closer examination actually appears absolutely understandable. So it appears that the three most recent shows at the gate are The Bloody Hand, The Anguish of the Archon, and The Merchant's Lusty Lady. We know that The Bloody Hand opens with a speech by a villainous dwarf who later raped someone. And here we find out that The Anguish of the Archon also opens with a speech by a dwarf, in all likelihood a villainous dwarf, as we find out later he raped someone in that play as well. And then there's a third play, The Merchant's Lusty Lady, which involves a grumpkin. Grumpkins are mythological beings to be feared. They also steal children and grant wishes. I imagine that a poorly thought out grumpkin wish is the reason that the merchant's lady is lusty. Nonetheless, we do appear to have a pattern, small evil beings as the antagonists, making big speeches at the beginning of the play. Bobono has been typecasted, and the plots of the shows appear to be very similar. So Arya mentions that Isambara would flay Bobono if he messes up, even though good dwarfs are hard to find. And this high demand in Braavos for acting dwarfs is rather interesting. Previously, Arya said that every acting troupe must have a dwarf. But as Arya says, there aren't that many dwarfs out there. Dwarfism is actually a very rare condition, only about 1 in 25,000 people have it. Which means there would only be a handful of dwarfs in Braavos, perhaps a dozen. And of those, how many would be actors or actors of quality? The point being an acting dwarf in Braavos seems to be a relatively good position to be in. And all of this directly contradicts our situation with Penny. Tyrion, perhaps based on his ideas of a dwarf's life in Westeros, pities Penny's position, thinking her life a desperate one, and thinking her lost without her brother. But in fact, no, Penny is an acting dwarf. Her career is in high demand. She has performed for the Sea Lord of Braavos and the King of Westeros. There's almost certainly a lucrative life for her in Braavos, a city where she used to reside. And yet Penny follows around Tyrion for some reason, as if she doesn't know what to do with her life. It all doesn't add up. "What are we playing, Mercy?" Bobono asked innocently. He is teasing me, Mercy thought. He's not drunk tonight. He knows the show perfectly well. "We are doing Ferrio's new Bloody Hand, in honor of the envoy from the Seven Kingdoms." "Now I recall." Bobono lowered his voice to a sinister croak. "The seven-faced god has cheated me," he said. "My noble sire he made of purest gold, and gold he made my siblings, boy and girl. But I am formed of darker stuff, of bones and blood and clay, twisted into this rude shape you see before you." And so here, rather explicitly, we are told that the show tonight is being put on to honor the Westerosi envoy, Harry Swift, who is a Lannister bannerman and grandfather to Lancel and Martin Lannister. The Braavosi appear to believe that Swift will enjoy this pro-Lannister piece of propaganda. Of course, the decision to send Swift to Braavos was made only 1 month prior to the opening of the show, which means word of the trip needed to make it to Braavos, Ferrio Farrell needed to write the play, and then the troupe needed time to rehearse it. All in all, Farrell had very little time to write, and the actors had very little time to rehearse, which means this hastily put together show is likely not of the best quality. Now we actually hear some lines from the show, including the line, "The seven-faced god has cheated me." So despite the Westerosi gods being one god with 7 faces or 7 aspects, no Westerosi has ever referred to him as a seven-faced god. Arya Hota does once, but he's from Norvos. This awkward phrasing would be like the Catholic god being referred to as a 3-personed god, rather than God with 3 divine persons. The phrase is not inaccurate, but linguistically off. It's something that identifies the speaker as an outsider, unfamiliar with the subject, or with an outsider's perspective on the subject, much in the same vein as the play's odd portrayal of the stranger as a demon. So Bobono claims that Tyrion is a perverse copy of his gold father, instead made of blood, bones, and clay. Being made of clay evokes the idea that Tyrion in the play is a golem, a monster from Jewish folklore, which made its way into Dungeons & Dragons in the 70s, and is now a standard fantasy monster. Now Tyrion being physically compared to his father is yet again another parallel to Slaver's Bay. While being dressed by Penny, Tyrion claims that he and his father could be twins, except for their dress, height, and hair. With that, he grabbed at her chest, fumbling for a nipple. "You have no titties! How can I rape a girl with no titties?" She caught his nose between her thumb and forefinger and twisted. "You'll have no nose until you get your hands off me." "Ow!" the dwarf squealed, releasing her. I'll grow titties in a year or two, Mercy rose to tower over the little man. But you'll never grow another nose. You think of that before you touch me there. Bobono rubbed his tender nose. There's no need to get so shy. I'll be raping you soon enough. Not until the second act. So in yet another parallel to the actual Tyrion, Bobono grabs for Arya's nipples, a regular practice for the real Tyrion with the real Shae, and then Arya grabs Bobono by the nose and threatens to rip his nose off if he doesn't behave himself. Of course, we all know that the real Tyrion lost his nose at the Blackwater, so if Bobono lost his nose, he would look much like the man he is playing. Bobono even rubs his nose after the grab, which is a tic that Tyrion now occasionally does throughout our story. And we get another reference to Penny with Bobono's bafflement at Arya's shyness, considering she is raped later in the show. Penny is a shy, innocent acting mummer, despite her routine being raunchy and containing simulated sex. Now, Arya then notes that she'll be growing breasts in a year or two, which does evoke the Sansa story a bit. Sansa is 2 years older than Arya, and Miranda Royce notes that she does not have large breasts, which is perhaps another clue that Sansa is a fraud. Sansa claims to be an older 14-year-old Elaine. But breasts and power is also a topic our author likes to write about. Miranda thinks her large breasts are an advantage over Sansa's smaller breasts in their ability to influence men. And Arya later thinks about her chest size and whether or not it will affect her power of seduction. And all of this big breast, small breast talk calls back the Blackwood-Bracken rivalry discussed in the Jaime story and the Flint-Nori rivalry discussed in the Jon story. Our author seems to be making a statement that big or flat-chested women both have the power of influence and the power to produce milk. But also, the flat chests of the Blackwoods and the Flints perhaps signal Arya's genetic heritage and the source of her special powers. Flints and Blackwoods are flat-chested, but perhaps telepathically talented, Bloodraven being a Blackwood, and the Stark children being descended from a Flint grandmother. If Arya does take after her Flint grandmother, she likely won't be growing any breasts in 2 years. Anyway, Arya then comments that the rape of her character doesn't happen until the second act of the story. Now, we can piece together the events of the play a little bit. We know that the play begins with Tyrion, played by Bobono, making a deal with the Stranger, played by Morrow, in a graveyard. And we know that there is a scene where a demonic boar, played by Big Brusco, kills Robert, played by Isambaro, and he makes a dying speech. We know that there is a scene where Tyrion rapes Shae, played by Mercy, and we know that there is a purple wedding with Joffrey and Marjorie, maybe played by Wendane, where Cersei, played by Lady Stork, keeps tearing her dress. And we know that Mercy's character Shae is eventually murdered. And so I will say, if Shae is only raped in the second act, this is a slight deviation from what Shae reports during Tyrion's trial. During the trial, she claims that Tyrion regularly raped her from the Green Fork onward. But there was one notable rape next to the dragon skulls the morning of the wedding, where Tyrion confessed his crimes. And so it seems likely that the dragon skulls rape is the one that's being portrayed, with the other ones excluded, as Shae never went into detail about them. And as it happens, Arya is another character connected to the dragon skulls, as she hid amongst them frightened, eavesdropping on Varys and Illyrio in a Game of Thrones. I always give Wendane's titties a nice squeeze when I rape her in the anguish of the Archon, the dwarf complained. She likes it, and the pit does too. You have to please the pit. That was one of Isambaro's wisdoms, as he liked to call them. You have to please the pit. I bet it would please the pit if I ripped off the dwarf's cock and beat him about the head with it, Mercy replied. That's something they won't have ever seen before. Always give them something they haven't seen before was another of Isambaro's wisdoms, and one that Bobono had no easy answer for. There, you're done, Mercy announced. Now see if you can keep it in your breeches till it's needed. And so here Bobono dubiously claims that Wendane likes it when he squeezes her breasts, and therefore Arya should like it too. Earlier, we found out that Wendane has been performing sexual favors for the right to wear costumes outside, so it's likely that Wendane is tolerating Bobono's advances to curry favor with Bobono, the star of the show, and Isambaro, the theater owner. We then get what appears to be some meta-commentary on fiction, or at least George R.R. Martin's fiction. So Isambaro apparently has pieces of advice for success, with one being, you have to please the pit. The pit in old-time theater was where the general poorer patrons stood and watched the show. The richer folks had seats further out. And so, to please the pit, one is essentially saying that one has to please the masses, and this is usually done with sex, violence, and lowbrow comedy. And this is not horrible advice. We all know that sex, violence, and lowbrow comedy does have general appeal, and it makes a piece of entertainment economically viable. If a piece of art is too highbrow and erudite, the general public doesn't understand it, and the audience will be tiny, if the piece of art even gains an audience at all. And The Bloody Hand is a crass tale, involving family betrayal, a sinister religion, sorcery, a mauled king, a raped and murdered woman, and a poisoned child. And of course, The Bloody Hand is more or less a Song of Ice and Fire, so George R. Martin is certainly saying that his own work has elements included specifically to please the pit. That is, please the masses. It shouldn't be lost on us that George R.R. Martin spent most of his life as a struggling science fiction writer before going to Hollywood and learning how to write to the people. Now, Arya then replies to Bobono that one also has to give the people something they haven't seen before. That is, be original or subvert expectations. And A Song of Ice and Fire does do this as well, with its plot twists and its killing off of traditional protagonists, and its propping up of untraditional protagonists. Drunken dwarfs, incestuous knights, manly women, child assassins. Arya even specifically talks about how removing Bobono's penis would be something new that would please the pit. And this evokes the Theon story, perhaps George R. Martin's strongest work from A Dance with Dragons, where our main character suffers through the trauma of losing his genitalia. Isambaro was calling for her again. Now he could not find his boar spear. Mercy found it for him, helped Big Brusco don his boar suit, checked the trick daggers just to make certain no one had replaced one with a real blade, someone had done that at the Dome once and a mummer had died, and poured Lady Stork the little nip of wine she liked to have before each play. When all the cries of "Mercy! Mercy! Mercy!" finally died away, she stole a moment for a quick peek out into the house. And so here we find out that it's Big Brusco who is playing the boar, and Arya performs a few final tasks, including finding a spear, checking the illegitimacy of daggers, and pouring some wine for Lady Stork. Now it is the second task of checking the daggers that is an interesting one. Pulling the whole switcheroo to murder someone does remind us of Arya switching a coin for a poison coin with the Thin Man in the Ugly Little Girl chapter. One does wonder if the act at the Dome was an act by a faceless man. And with that notion of murder, one also wonders if Arya is currently not just in training, but also on an assignment of murder. This is Arya's point of view, and it is possible that the description of these tasks is not just some random list of things Arya did, but potentially useful information. After all, as Cat of the Canals and Blind Beth, Arya was not just gaining skills, but she was also tasked with collecting information for the House of Black and White. She was a spy on top of being a trainee. Now we are uncertain if Arya as Mercy has another task besides training to be a mummer, but certainly faceless men can do multiple things at once. We can note several ways Arya could potentially kill people based on her tasks. She could poison the glue that she used for Maro's horn. She could put poison on Isambaro's crown or kill him while he's in the privy. She could put poison in the dye used for Bobono's fake penis. She could switch out a fake dagger for a real dagger, which would lead to Isambaro, who plays Robert, killing Big Brusco, who plays the boar. And she could poison Lady Stork's wine. All of these are possibilities if Arya does indeed have a mark, and one of these people happens to be it. And this is a good place to stop. We will continue on in Mercy Part 6. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.